Welcome to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name's Larry Blumenfeld, and well, if you had today's, or you went online today at the Wall Street Journal, you'd see a review of mine about two wonderful drummers. If you looked at the Nation magazine last week, you would have seen a piece of mine, not really about the Jazz Festival, more about the politics and social justice issues around that music. And I'm often here. This has kind of become a second home for me, where they invite me to talk about all those sorts of things and to invite other people into those conversations. I want to thank Ryan Maloney, who can't be here tonight, and Tracy Hyder-Suffern, who is the director of this museum. This is a special place, and I've been working with them for more than 15 years. It's a special place because it invites the idea that there's great jazz music, but there's also a very rich and broad and deep culture and community around the music. And that culture and that community touches on really all the things that matter to us, which somehow figure into the music. 4 years ago, I started this series, Jazz and Social Justice, and a lot of it was motivated, if you remember, after the election, 2016, a lot of people were out in streets, and I was wondering, why are we marching? There are many different reasons why we were marching. I also knew a lot of great musicians who cared about a lot of those issues and those reasons we were marching, and I wanted to create situations where people could hear great live music in an intimate setting or streamed online, and then we could dig into some of those issues that those musicians are deeply concerned with and sometimes are the subject of their music. So we've talked about a lot of things. This one, volume 18, the 18th in this series, you're lucky enough to hear saxophonist Jimmy Greene, and this one is Jimmy Greene, Answering Violence with Artistry, How Music and Community Heal Us. And I'm going to talk a little more than I would usually talk, and there are reasons for that. I want to welcome Jimmy for coming here from his home in Connecticut. He is among the most respected jazz saxophonists of his generation and of my watch of covering jazz. He's worked, in addition to his own fine albums, he's been on more than 75 albums, played with, toured with people like Horace Silver. He just played for Ron Carter's 85th anniversary, Freddie Hubbard, Harry Connick Jr., Dee Dee Bridgewater. I could go on. He's also been a source and a mentor for younger musicians, including his work as a professor at Western Connecticut State University. I want to read something from his webpage that is suddenly more timely than ever. The deluge of political divisiveness, horrific violence, and hateful rhetoric that seem to have polluted our lives on a daily basis over the last few years have left many people across the country and around the world feeling angry, frustrated, and hopeless. It would be more than understandable if that feeling was even more intense for Jimmy Greene, for whom the flood of outrageous headlines and social media missives play out against a backdrop of personal tragedy. But instead, Jimmy has been a source of inspiration and hope and faith, emanating from his music and in other ways. Together with his wife, Nelba Marquez Greene, they created the Anna Grace Project, which takes as its mission promoting love, connection, and community for every child and family. That foundation was named for Anna Marquez Greene, who shared Jimmy Greene's passion for music, was his daughter, was a student at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Anna and 19 other children, along with 6 educators, were lost to a mass shooting on December 14th, 2012. Anna was then 6, which was the same age when Jimmy was when he first picked up his saxophone. So again, that mission statement from his foundation means they answer hate, violence, and chaos with love, care, and faith. Jimmy and I had been talking for quite some time, trying to find a date and a way to do this. We knew it was an important, urgent theme, what we wanted to talk about, but we had no idea how timely it would be. So I'll just state a few facts. You know them. On Saturday, gunman Peyton S. Gendron used a Bushmaster assault-style rifle to kill 10 people in a Buffalo grocery store. In an online missive, he made it clear that he was motivated by a version of replacement theory and that he sought to kill black people in order to prevent white people from losing their rightful control of this country. According to the Gun Violence Archive, which is a major resource, nearly a third of the world's public mass shootings in the past 50 or 60 years have occurred in this country. I wanted to mention all that. You already kind of knew that. Answering violence with artistry, how music and community heal us. That is the theme that Jimmy wanted to talk about tonight. Promoting love, connection, and community for every child and family. That is Jimmy Greene and his wife's answer to what he endured and the basis for his foundation. So here, before we talk about some of those ideas, you're lucky enough to hear Jimmy Greene together with pianist Anthony Wanzi. He'll perform some of his original compositions. Please help me welcome Jimmy Greene and Anthony Wanzi.
How about it for Mr. Anthony Wanzi on the piano? Anthony Wanzi. Wanzi and I have known each other for a long time. I think we met back in the Boston days, back in the mid-90s in Wally's, yeah. But anyway, that tune actually speaks to the one we just played, that time period. I was mentored and studied with for many years the great saxophonist Jackie McLean. It's happens to be his birthday today. May 17th was when he was born, in 1931, yeah. And that tune grew out of a song that he originally wrote, or at least a set of chord changes that he wrote back in the 90s. So I entitled that one Big Guy. And we'll talk more about the title of it later, but we're going to go on with a tune, another tune of mine. This was, first of all, Big Guy came from a record that I made, about, goodness, 6 years ago now, called Flowers, Beautiful Life, Volume 2. And the next song is from the first volume of Beautiful Life, which we'll talk about once we're done playing here. And this is for my daughter, Anna, and it talks about, there's lyrics to the song. It's sung on the album by the great vocalist Kurt Elling and a children's choir. And it talks about my daughter, just her personality, her demeanor, the way she moved about the world. It's called Anna's Way. just finished an original song of mine from an album I did, goodness, 13 or so years ago called Mission Statement. And that song kind of tells a lot about what we're going to be talking about a little later. The name of that song is Love in Action. Love in Action. And we're going to finish. I spoke about Jackie McLean earlier. It's his birthday, and he was a big part of my life and a big part of a lot of people's lives. He actually grew up not too far from here, right up on Sugar Hill. And we're going to play a song of his to close out, and this is probably his most well-known song. He named it after his daughter as well. Go figure. And it's called Little Melanie. Jimmy Greene, thank you.
Don't go far. All right. While We set up a couple of chairs. It's a good time to pause for a moment. I don't know about you. I've just recently begun going out, hearing live music in person, and sometimes I forget what it means to sit up close and hear something that beautiful and that powerful, created in the moment just for you. Please, once again, for Jimmy Greene and Anthony Wanzi, or as some of us call him, the real Joe Gardner. Look, the shoes, even the shoes are the same. And you know, I did an event, one of these, a couple of months ago with a singer named Faye Victor, who's wonderful, and it was a different discussion about responses to trauma. Do we have another mic here, or should we use the other? Here, why don't you sit here and use your mic? Yeah, use that mic.
All right.
And Faye had a song in which she kept repeating kind of chant-like thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. And I know what she was trying to do was reclaim, you know, the politicians come and they say thoughts and prayers, but what does it mean? And she was sort of reclaiming that. And I understood that for the people who are in this culture, there are thoughts and prayers that mean something, that get conveyed in many ways, especially music. So, Jimmy, again, thank you. That was kind of stunningly beautiful. And maybe, you know, you played that piece named for with lyrics about your daughter, but we didn't hear the lyrics. So maybe just a place to start is, what should everyone know about her demeanor and how she walked this earth?
Well,
Yeah,
all
we're
right. She was a very loving human being. She only lived 6.5 years, but that 6.5 years was so full of love. She kind of had a radar. She knew if any one of us, my wife, myself, or her older brother, my son, was having a tough day or needed a pick-me-up, she would kind of sense it and come and give us a humongous hug. She was very, very affectionate. She was very individualistic as far as the way she liked to dress. Even at a very, very young age, she had a very interesting taste in clothing and outfits. She matched, she put together patterns and colors that were really bright and bold, and you know, and to this day I wear socks like these just to kind of remind me of her, you know. She was, she just showed love to everyone around her. She was very warm and loving and affectionate, and loved to dance and loved to sing. Had a beautiful singing voice even as a very little child. Loved music, loved dance, loved life. Yeah.
You know, throughout music and certainly jazz history, there's been a lot of music that either commemorated great moments or really dealt with some terrible sadness or tragedy in powerful ways. And I remember hearing that album, Beautiful Life, when it came out, and it really was kind of, you know, you don't want to project too much on the music, but it really was such a powerful evocation of things that I knew I couldn't understand. But what, at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, what was it like to pick up your horn again and your sax again and start playing? Was music making different in both how you went about it or why you went about it?
Absolutely. I think the first 6 weeks or so after my daughter was killed on December 14th, 2012, I didn't have, well, first of all, there was so much going on in my house. And we can go into this maybe later, but we had a lot of support from family and friends from far and wide that came to be with us, and support from a lot of others too. So my house was always full with people, and That was very helpful for us in a lot of ways. In addition, I didn't have the physical strength to practice. I didn't have the time and space, nor the physical strength to go about the things I would normally be doing. I just wasn't there. I couldn't even drive a car for the first couple days. All my limbs were like this. So the thing that kind of got me, a couple things got me pointed toward the direction of making music. One of them was, at the time, right before my daughter was killed, I was applying to Manhattan School of Music to their doctoral program in jazz music and jazz studies. So I had sent in like my portfolio, and that program is heavy on composition. Music was always going on, it just wasn't being expressed physically, on an instrument. So the music process, and music is just an extension, it's an expression of your life in that moment, right? So my life in that moment was consumed with the grieving process, with coming to terms with what had happened to my little girl. So all the music that was written around that time, that's what it is,
And I know on that one track, not only was it a choir, a child's choir, but it was the choir from her former school, right?
Yeah, speaking of the Cheskys, David Chesky was working with me, and he suggested the idea, what if we have a children's choir? And when he mentioned that, it really hit me really hard, because my daughter loved to sing. And she had sung, just to give you a little background, as a musician, I had always done some teaching thanks to Jackie McLean, my own mentor, who, in addition to having one of the greatest careers ever as a saxophonist, as a performer, had one of the greatest careers ever as an educator. He touched so many lives through the Artist Collective and through the Hart School, where he taught, where I studied. So teaching was always a part of what I did, and I actually, my family, I moved to Canada, to Winnipeg, for 3 years. I took a position at the university there in a brand new jazz studies program there. So when my daughter was killed, we had just come back. I moved back to take a position in Connecticut, where I teach now, Western Connecticut State University. So my kids started school in Winnipeg. They went to this beautiful school, Linden Christian School, and they participated in all the music program there. So my daughter sang in the choir. So when David suggested having a children's choir, it hit me. And he suggested, some choirs, in this area, some children's choirs in the tri-state area. And I said, you know what, those would be great, but I want the kids that knew my daughter to sing on the record. I think that would be even greater, to have kids that actually, to sing about her. I want kids that actually knew her to sing about that. To me, that makes most sense. So we actually, we did the instrumental tracking here in the city, and I actually flew up to Winnipeg to the school, and we recorded the children's choir vocals.
Now you did that album, and then you did a follow-up. And so in doing that, and then in hearing what you realized, was that useful for you in terms of dealing with your own grief or finding the right path forward?
Music is it's a language in and of itself. It's a way that humans connect and express themselves, and for me, it's no different, right? I often there's an expression. It's not mine, obviously, but where words fail, music begins. So helpful. It's kind of hard to say it's helpful to get through grief by making music. What I think is more accurate is that with music, I can say things that I can't with words, and I can express and feel things and kind of paint a picture of things and kind of create create a little world, in music and in a song or in a chord or in a melody that I feel speaks to me, speaks to my daughter, speaks to our situation, speaks to, our world, I guess. So in that way, it's helpful to move along being a musician, I feel. Yeah.
And I really, I couldn't possibly have experienced it the way you did, and I'm also not a musician, but I believe in what you said about music very strongly, especially about its spiritual and humanistic content. And just because you mentioned Jackie, who was such a powerful musician and such a powerful educator at a time when not that many people were doing what he was doing, did he talk to you when you were studying with him about that spiritual content and about a larger purpose to the music that he made and that you would make?
He didn't speak so much in those terms to me personally, but it was evident in the music that he played. Obviously, he was a man of great conviction and power. Like his presence, when you walked in a room, you knew he was there. Especially us as students. He wore this Egyptian musk cologne, and when we smelled that in the hallways, we always walked a little straighter. We always watched what we were doing and saying because we knew J-Mac was there. But he always wore two neck straps, two identical saxophone neck straps like this one, And one day, I went to school with a bunch of my buddies, even to this day. We were at the Hart School together, saxophonists. We lived together. Julius Tolentino, Wayne Escoffrey, Chris Allen. And one of us, we were all around J-Mac one day, and one of us, we called him Mr. McLean in those days, but after I graduated, he said, "Now, son, call me J-Mac." So I call him J-Mac. One of us asked him, "Mr. McLean, why do you have two neck straps?" Right? And he said, "One's for me and one's for Bird," meaning Charlie Parker, who was his mentor and someone he followed around when he was a young musician, and someone who everybody in J-Mac's generation wanted to play like Charlie Parker. I mean, even now, everybody's trying to still chase the bird, So that speaks to, just what he thought about the whole tradition of the music, spirit that's encapsulated in music, and all those kind of threads that run through it.
Now, I never asked him, so now you told me something I didn't know. Obviously what you and your family endured was a very personal tragedy, but it also connected to, well, first of all, there was a community of people who suffered that day, but it pointed to larger ills, larger problems, and sadly, a recurring problem. And one thing you and your wife chose to do was to create the Anna Grace Project, which I mentioned earlier, to promote love, connection, and community for every child and family. Can you talk a little bit about how you pursued that, or how that took shape, and what it involves?
Sure. I think one of the big themes in my life and my family's life, and I'm sure all of your lives too, is connection and community. We grew up in the Hartford area. That's where we're from. That's where both of our kids were born. So, and my mom grew up in the Hartford area. My grandparents grew up in the Hartford area. So we kind of go back in that community quite a ways. When our daughter was killed, our communities, and that community, even though we had moved away, I had lived in New York, we had moved back, we had moved to Canada, and had just moved back to Connecticut, but weren't really in the Hartford area. We were probably an hour away. But that community embraced us. And there were several things that happened at the same time. The first thing was probably as far as ways to memorialize our daughter, ways to remember her, and ways to kind of affect, maybe in some ways pay forward to the community that had supported us. The first thing that happened was someone asked in the days after my daughter was killed, in lieu of flowers, is there something is there a charity or a foundation I can donate to? And I thought to myself, well, no, there isn't. So I spoke to the dean of, I had just been teaching at WestCon for 4 months. And I spoke to the dean at the time, who was a great guy, also a saxophone player named Dan Goebel. And he said, we can start a scholarship fund, in your daughter's name here at WestCon. If that's something that you and your family are interested in, I can set it up right away. And so he did that. And my wife, Nelba, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, was working, again, just for a couple months as an instructor and a clinical supervisor at Central Connecticut State University and Klingberg Family Centers. And through her connections at Klingberg, this idea of starting an organization was born. And Nelba kind of, through a lot of thought and prayer and communication with people at Klingberg, at CCSU, and in the community, decided to start this thing called the Honor Grace Project. And in all instances, the things that we have given our support to have been, in a way, things that we feel are important to do in the community, but also in a way, in also honoring our daughter and what she loved and what she was about, and also as a response to the conditions that the family and the person who murdered her lived in. And we wanted to do something that, within our own small spheres of influence, that would hopefully lessen the instances of gun violence. So connection and community are two things that we realize are lacking in many of these mass shootings. There's a lot of isolation. There's either a willful or kind of a, over time, disconnection with community and with humanity, right? So we wanted to focus on things that humanize us, things that connect us. And so my wife being an LMFT, and having been in a former life a public school teacher, she was a music educator. We went to Hart together, and she was a music ed major. She got her first job out of college as a music teacher. Music has always played a big part, but music, the arts, they connect us, right? Communities, schools, they connect us. So we wanted to do something in memory of our daughter that would promote connection. So the Honor Grace Project is one of those things. The scholarship at WestCon is one of those things that offers some help to young people to pay their college tuition, which we all know is really high these days, and is getting higher. Those things are things we're proud of, that we have been able. And the Honor Grace Project has done just so many amazing things in the community. Just my wife left her position at CCSU a year ago to focus on the Honor Grace Project full time. And just in that span of time, just in the past year, I think over $100,000 have been given out to community initiatives from the Honor Grace Project to the community to fund things that promote love, community, and connection for every child and family.
And so then it is an ongoing project that people can contribute to and
absolutely
look into. And I'm just so blown away by everything you said about developing that project and that foundation, and especially by that idea of, there were, because on the face of it, in reading the news, it's easy for people to say senseless, isolated. None of these things are isolated incidents. There's always a story. There's always a context. And you're bringing back, now I remember reading, just the context was troubling. We don't want to delve into the story of that shooter, but the idea that there are many things that aren't a reason, but if you have the opposite, the kind of community that you had, that's a way to steer people in the right direction. And I do believe in the music you make, the world you inherited from Jackie McLean, there's a community there too, right? That
Super
binds
strong.
you.
I mean, the music community from all over, from close, from far, really rallied around my family and me in so many ways. One example, a good friend of mine in whose band I had played when I was younger, Harry Connick Jr. He also lives in Connecticut, and on the day my daughter was murdered, he showed up at my house and made my son had just been given the news of what had happened, and my son was in the building at the time. Had just been given the news what had happened to his sister, because we had him taken to some friend's house. And right after we had told him, I won't go into detail about what that scene was like, but it was very traumatic and very, very painful for all of us to have to deliver the news, to come to grips with it ourselves, and to see his reaction and what was going on. Harry showed up unannounced right after that, and the first thought was like, I don't know what to say. I have nothing. And Harry didn't wait for someone to make him feel comfortable, or he just went right in, came right in, and started talking to my son and asked him what things he liked and made him smile. And that was so powerful. It was such a beautiful thing that he did. And the next day, and I won't go into detail about what the next day looked like. Imagine every news outlet, every newspaper, every cable news outlet, every network, every internet outlet showing up at your front door and staying there all day. And people bringing you gifts saying they're from so-and-so, can I come in and talk to you? And, just the most unscrupulous things you could imagine. So after a long day of this, thankfully, the police and later the FBI would kind of camp out at our house and kind of tell these people to beat it. But after a long day of everybody pulling up to our front door, another car, this is like 10:30 at night, and things are finally quiet, and a car pulls up to our front door. And I'm like, more of the same, and I'm trying to look out the front window to see who it is. The person went around to their passenger side. I'm like, are they hiding? Like what? And the person comes out with this humongous pot. It's Harry with a humongous pot of gumbo that he and his daughter had been making all day, So that just gives you one little snippet of the community, the music community, how they came to rally around our family. That community is the community of musicians, the community of artists, has been a huge source of support.
Even before you mentioned the gumbo, just because I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans, I'm like, Harry knew what to do because he's really from New Orleans.
Oh, he is. Yeah.
And there's a level, for people who really are from New Orleans, there's a level of community and humanity. And I guess what you're saying is that in all the months and years to follow, you experienced both the best and worst of people.
Absolutely.
Which is often the case. Now, when you and I mentioned before, when you and I talked about doing this, And I am just once again grateful to you for sharing and being generous about your thoughts about all of this. When we first talked about this, we knew that this is a very relevant and deep topic, but I don't think we could have imagined what it would mean for it to be Tuesday following this past Saturday. I know that Anthony was telling me that on Saturday he was in Buffalo playing a gig. He was in that city. I know that not that long ago when there was a shooting in the subway in Brooklyn, it was the subway my son's best friend takes to school. It was right around that time. It was the shooter left through the station that's right near my son's school. And I don't follow news every minute in my office, so I found out by getting an email from the school about lockdown. And then Saturday, we hear this news. And again, I'll mention Peyton S. Gendron used a Bushmaster assault-style rifle to kill 10 people. He wanted to kill more in a grocery store. He did research to find out where there was a high concentration of black people. He wrote a long missive about replacement theory, which is something that's talked about, which talks about white people losing their rightful control, being replaced by black people and Jews. He described himself as part of a movement. He hoped others would follow his example. He said he was inspired by similar attacks, like the 2015 murder of 9 black worshipers at a church in Charleston, the 2018 murder of 11 Jewish worshipers at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, the 2019 murder of 51 Muslim worshipers at 2 mosques in New Zealand, and the 2019 murder of 23 people, mostly Latino, in El Paso, also in El Paso. Each of these are separate tragedies that each individual person and their family, but clearly there's a through line here, and it's an equal opportunity employer in terms of when, in this case, there's hate and it's directed at people. I don't know, is it fair to ask you, when you hear news like Saturday's news, is there something to offer people who are walking around saying, why is this happening? What do we do? What do we say?
Yes. There's a responsibility that we all have, right? To love one another. There's a responsibility we all have to teach our children, to teach them to love one another. And in all these instances, something broke down there. I don't know any of these people personally, so I can't speculate as to what broke down at what particular time. But I do know that, to speak specifically about the incident on Saturday, those views don't pop out of thin air, Those views, especially in a young person. Young people, as for all of you remembering back to when you were young, our friends are big influences on us. I have a teenage son now. My son is a teenager. His friends are a big influence on him. But the things that he does, I'm not with him 24 hours a day. But we have tried our best, and we pray for him all the time. And like I said, I'm not with him 24 hours a day, but we try our best to instill in him the values that we believe in, and that we believe will A, keep him safe, and B, allow him to enjoy the fullness and beauty of life. And we stand by those things. So whatever he chooses to do, and he's been in situations where there are people that have wanted him to do things that are against those things, and he's been very candid with us that, that's just not a direction that I want to go in, I'm not saying that he's immune or that he's, a saint, or that he's not a human that's subject to everything we're all subject to. But there's certain things or certain ways that parents have such an important role in raising young people. And in all the instances that you mentioned, they're young people that are doing these things. In my situation, it was a young person. So specifically about the incident Saturday, that young man wasn't taught, that young man didn't grab hatred of black people and Jews out of the air. If I had to bet money, I don't bet on very many things, but I had to bet money, there was a lot of support for that sentiment at home. There was at least enough support where that kind of thinking wasn't ever refuted, you know? So I think in a lot of situations, I see this in my own situation where the victim's family, like my daughter is the victim, her family is forced to advocate for change, right? In the situation that happened on Saturday, people of color, Jews, are forced to advocate for change. I don't think that the onus is on us, right? We're not teaching anybody to hate us, and you know, so the onus is on the folks that are teaching this replacement theory. The onus is on the parents in those households, those communities, right? I've never been anything but a black man, right, here in the United States. I'm not privy to conversations of people when no black people are present because I'm not there, right? But I don't know what goes on in those conversations, but this young man was obviously radicalized in some sort of way, and I don't pretend to know enough to go into it in depth. I'm just saying that the onus is on, in this instance, the radical folks, and not just the radical folks. There's a lot of well-meaning, and I'm not denigrating anybody's culture, right? And I say this with all delicacy, but there are a lot of very well-meaning white people who, instead of absolutely refuting this replacement theory, in some way it resonates with them. So instead of saying, "Attaboy, that's right," we'll say nothing, and that's just as dangerous. So when the onus is on the folks who would choose to say nothing, why am I not speaking up against this? You know, to really understand, it takes everyone, right? It takes all of us. You know.
I'm really glad you said that, and I often have in the back of my head Stevie Wonder singing that line from "Love's in Need of Love Today." Hate's going round, and I'm like, you've got to be aware, hate's like it's actually happened. I mean, a whole different story. I remember I was with Terrence Blanchard in New Orleans before they took the Confederate monuments down. And so I can't really understand how you could oppose taking the Confederate monuments down, but I respect the idea that American could voice their opinion against taking the monuments down. I was there. What I didn't understand was why there were a group of people wearing Confederate uniforms, and I didn't see their guns, but they had a military-looking encampment, and it was very clear that if they didn't have arms, they wanted you to think they had arms, and they had set up base camp at each one of these things. And to me, that's a very different message than saying, I disagree with this decision. So that's like,
They're still fighting the Civil War in their minds.
Oh, I had
Right?
my pad and my pen, and I went up to these people, and they made it very clear to me that they thought the South got it right in the 1860s. So, no trouble saying that. But even if you want to, the signs of hate are pretty obvious. Maybe it's a little naive, but I do invest in the things you talked about when you talk about Jackie, the way we see you and Anthony Wanzi relate and communicate, in the things I said about this museum and a culture. It's not the answer, but I do think that that culture is one answer. That I think it's a drag that you guys can't get record deals the way you might have 30 years ago. I think it's a drag that I can't write about jazz the way I used to in the same places as 25 years ago. But I'm less concerned about that than I am about the idea that there is a jazz culture or a culture around any real art that we share and we live in and it has some values. And I feel like, because do you think that that's one answer to that horrible alienation and lack of any rootedness?
Absolutely. The music that we play is by its nature a social music. It's equal parts art music, folk music,
Yep.
right, and popular music, right. It requires communication. I remember Wynton Marsalis saying one time, "It's impossible to swing by yourself." Swinging is, by its very nature, by its definition, is people coming together and agreeing upon a feeling and a sound and rhythm. So the connections that are created through music, playing music, and relating to folks, are very deep, and that's why one of the things that we support, or my family and I have really been very purposeful in supporting, is music and the arts, because we know those things humanize us, they connect us.
I would normally at any one of these events say, okay, do any of you have any questions for Jimmy Greene? And please, if you do, this would be a good time to ask them. But I think we're all walking around processing this thing that happened Saturday and all the associations we have with it and the things we've been talking about. So I'm going to invite people, if you have questions, ask them, or if there's just something you want to share or ask about all that. This is a forum for all of us. So it's a small enough scene where just shout it out. Seriously. Go for it.
Jimmy, when you were talking before about how kids are basically taught to hate, I believe that innately they are creatures of love. And it's like you said, you don't know what goes on in other people's houses. But then at the same point, if people don't stand up, you particularly talked about particular people that don't stand up and condemn what's being done. They just sit silently. So the people that do it assume that they're on their side since they're not speaking out against it. And I disagree with that statement at the end of the day.
It's very true. It's very true, and you see it. The phrase "tacit approval," right? Like, you don't say anything, but by your silence, the person feels like they're supported. So yeah, it's very true.
Right. If you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have a question, comment, idea?
You talk about children have to be taught to hate and to be prejudiced. And I will share that they can also be taught the opposite. I'm half English and half Irish. And my Irish grandfather was one of the worst racists I've ever known in my life. And my father
Yeah, I absolutely, and thanks for sharing about your growing up, and that just speaks to how important parents are, even more important than grandparents in your case. You know, your father's wisdom, right, and his love, kind of gave you a framework with which to deal with your grandfather. You know, you're to love him, right? But don't listen to what he has to say on these subjects, you know. And that speaks to how important parents are. Parents are so vitally important from day one. You think like what's a 2-month-old, 3-month-old, 6-month-old, 1-year-old gonna remember about that time? I don't remember when I was 6 months old. You don't remember in your mind, but you remember in your body. You know, you remember things resonate with you. You know, in certain ways because you experience them as a 2-month-old, 3-month-old, 6-month-old. The relationships you develop, the way you look at others is in a large part by what you experience when you're very young. So the beginning of those first few years of your life are so vitally important. Parents play a huge part in what happens to a child during that time.
I know that I grew up in Canarsie, in Brooklyn, deep in Brooklyn, in the late 60s and 70s. And it was a classically racist, middle-class, white neighborhood. So much so that my first job at a university press, one day, a scholarly book came across my desk, and it was a study of 3 classically racist neighborhoods around when busing was an issue. One was in Boston, one was my neighborhood, and that's what it was. And way down the line later, I realized if you grow up that way, there are 2 roads you can go. You can go down that road, or it's good to, or you can see it really early on, know what it is, and understand that you don't want. And I do think it wasn't until you said what you said that I think in my case, it was because I had a mother who had a lot of compassion, and she wasn't on that team. And I didn't really have a father. I didn't have the kind of nurturing environment you're talking about. But I did learn that. I did learn that. And by the time I went away to college, I saw through it. But now there are many, many things that can be lines of thought when you hear about what happened on Saturday. The shooter, as in many of these cases, used an assault weapon. However you feel about the right to bear arms, I'm not sure that private citizens should have weapons that were intended for war. I'm not here campaigning about that. I'm just saying there are so many. What were the conditions that led to a person doing that? What's made available to them to act? Why is it okay? One statistic I came across when I happened to be looking at stuff the other day was, in one study, in the past 60 years, 1/3 of the mass shootings have happened in the world, have happened in this country. And I don't know, maybe I'm old, but I remember being younger when mass shooting was not a term I knew, like that I heard a lot. But now, I'm going to ask, I guess I'll ask people here, I can't ask the people online, what were your responses to what you heard on Saturday? If anyone cares to share, I'm interested. Go ahead.
Made it so much even more so unbearable was the shooting of a little girl
couple things. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Early on, our daughter my wife is from Puerto Rico, originally, was born there, and moved here with her parents when she was 2 years old. So our daughter was the only child of color that was killed in Newtown. And a few months after my daughter was killed, there was a shooting in a nightclub in New Haven, Connecticut, and a couple of young people died. And the parents of one of them said, we found out about this because we heard it in the news, they said, well, the whole world came to support, the Sandy Hook families. Where's the support for our daughter? What, our daughter doesn't look like most of those kids that died in Sandy Hook. Where's the support for our daughter? And through a parent's grief, we heard a strong message that, there are young people of color who are shot and killed, and no one knows their name. And it's important to never forget the names, to always say, not just to never forget, but to say the names, to remember the people, because every tragedy has a story, and every life has a story, no matter where they're from. And people will say, yeah, the Sandy Hook it wasn't because all the kids were white, it's because they were so young. Okay, well, but a life is a life, and another thing, along those lines, and you were talking about assault weapons. Very early on, we were involved in some legislation, not suggesting legislation. None of us is a congressperson or a senator, but there was some legislation that was introduced. First of all, President Obama at the time enacted some executive orders around gun responsibility. And there was some legislation in Congress. It passed through the House, and it went to the Senate. This was in April of 2013. And the bill was it's called Manchin-Toomey. So Joe Manchin and Toomey, I forget his first name, Pat Toomey, the senator from Pennsylvania, and the one from Illinois. Manchin's from West Virginia, I believe. But anyway, they co-sponsored this bill that had it's like scratches the surface of what needs to happen as far as gun responsibility. The two things that were on the table were reducing magazine size, right, from to 10. So a clip couldn't hold any more than 10 bullets. And then another one was, I don't want to get into this. I'm not into arguing against anyone's Second Amendment rights. But if you're a hunter, I don't understand why you need 30 bullets to go shoot Bambi. I don't get it. But anyway. And then the other one was for universal background checks. And leading up to the vote on the Senate floor, we met with a couple senators. And one senator said, Portman from Ohio said, the bill will save lives, but I'm still going to vote no. Chambliss from Georgia said, well, in my district, we don't really go to licensed gun dealers to buy a gun. We just kind of trade amongst one another. And one of the other parents who had lost their child in Sandy Hook, like I did, was sitting next to him and said, that's interesting, Senator. So in your district, how do folks get driver's licenses? Do they have to go to the DMV, or do they trade licenses among themselves? And he sat there in silence. So there's things that we saw that were heartbreaking. And there's things that we saw that were wonderful, too. There's a senator from Illinois who was a Republican senator at the time. And I'm not here to get into politics and argue Republican, Democrat. But, the vote went along party lines for the most part at the time. So there was a Republican senator who voted for the legislation. And had across his desk in his office pictures of several Republicans in history who had bucked the party line and had done the right thing. And he said, I keep those 3 portraits, and I look at them every day as I sit down at my desk. And it encouraged me to do the right thing. And for the life of me, I can't remember his name now, but he's from Illinois. He was in that really dark, dreary day, that gave me a little bit of hope, you know. But we quickly lost the steam to really be political advocates, you know, to really kind of be, because like I said earlier, it's often the victims who have to, you know, not only, our job is to heal, our job is to parent our child and help him along the way, and to take on all these other responsibilities, I think is too much. Other people need to step up and do that, and there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of work in that regard, but we figured that our energies were best spent doing things like the Honor Grace Project, like the scholarship at WestCon, and also we're very, very proud of and honored by my wife and I both went to an arts magnet high school, and it's run by an organization in the Hartford area where we grew up called the Capital Region Education Council. Well, in 2014, the president of the Capital Region Education Council came to us and said, we are building, we have the Arts Magnet High School that my wife and I went to. They moved into a brand new facility. They were ready to build one for the middle school and elementary school kids, K through 8. And they came to us, my wife, and said, we want to build this thing, and we want to name it after your daughter. So it had the first students were welcomed into the building in January. The ribbon cutting was in late March. So it's called the CREC, Capital Region Education Council Honor Grace Academy of the Arts, and it's K through 8 throughout the Hartford region of Connecticut. So that place, and my wife worked very closely with the folks that did all the building, and not just the builders, but the interior designers. So you go in there and you basically see all the things my daughter loved in the carpet color, in the wall treatments, her artwork, her picture, her photos. It's like, it's an amazing, amazing place. And it's the Capital Region Education Council and the magnet school system in Connecticut came as a result of this landmark lawsuit called Sheff versus O'Neill, which is essentially school desegregation. Because Connecticut, as you might know, has a big disparity in socioeconomic and culture between the cities and the suburbs. So this was trying to equalize the playing field and kind of create these magnet schools that kids from that are very diverse, and that kids from all the communities kind of go to as a hub, and they've been very successful in Connecticut. So we're very proud that the Elementary Arts Magnet School is named after our daughter.
Well, I think actually, because we do have to pretty much end, I'm glad you brought it back to Anna Grace, because that is the right place to end. All of these events, and especially this one, is one that I hope that, you know, it's meant to start a conversation, and I hope that conversation will ripple out and wherever you go, however you want, if you're online, however your digital life goes, and in those ways it can counter the other kinds of messages, or at least stand against them. But you know, earlier, when you were going way beyond the range of that instrument there, and blowing hard and then blowing really tender, and you know, that was one version of pouring your heart out that really moved me. And then, you know, sometimes I feel bad about, wow, we're going to stop playing and just talk. But then I can't believe how generous you've been in pouring your heart out in a whole different way. So please help me thank Jimmy Greene for all these things. and to Anthony Wanzi, the real Joe Gardner. And thank you so much for being here. Please come back. Please come back to this place. Please come back and talk to me some more. Good night.